Chief Guard of the Republic Veteran Radio Shout-Out Show with your hosts, Michael Tuman and Paul Burvid. Every Saturday, noon to 1. Today's going to be noon to 2 because the Sox don't start till 3.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go, 2 hours. At the Fox River Valley Media Network out of Elgin, streaming on WRMN1410.com. You can follow us on their YouTube live channel, WRMN 1410. And the studio number here to call in is 847-931-1410. You could also hit us up in the text number, 505-926-1410. And we can answer you through text. So there are multiple ways to contact us. If you're really serious about it, give us a call. Maybe we'll have you in on the studio. How you doing, Paul?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Let me take this time before I forget, because I'm sure we're going to get into it. Happy Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day tomorrow to all the mothers, grandmothers, godmothers, stepmothers, all of them out there, especially my mom, who puts up with a lot of nonsense from me. All right? And most especially, since this is a radio veteran shout-out show, a happy Mother's Day to all the female veteran mothers. I mean, the ones that, since Vietnam, since the all-volunteer Army, we have got a lot of women in there that were doing dual service. I mean, they're working in the Army and raising a family, too. That is really hard work, and I really appreciate them for that. Over my career of 38 years, I've worked with many wonderful women in the military. So I'm not one of those hee-haw super macho men that thinks the military is just for men. It's a men's world, blah, blah, blah. But no. There are many women that I would definitely be in combat with. There are, and it's an even thing, though. There's some guys I would not be in combat with, and there's some women that I would not be in combat with. I would be like, holy cow, no, But that's both of them, that's both sides. So I got that out of the way. If you're a veteran organization, you got something going, give us a call in. We'll give you a shout out. All right, Paul. So you had the best idea, man, when you said it, because I had some idea and it left me. It just floated away. It's probably floating around in my basement somewhere. I'll run into it. And but when you mentioned the military punitive expedition against Pancho Villa, that was like, wow. Because I think that has some current event status now. What do you think, Paul?
I do. I think there's a definite correlation to what happened in the past and what's going on now.
So they're doing a little bit of history of Pancho Villa. All right, the Mexican Revolution. It started around 1910 and went to
1923 around.
Yeah, when it finally was settled, the dust was settled and everything. But after they had defeated the current regime, which was kind of a dictatorship that got his place through a coup, Pancho Villa had he was basically horse-drawn infantry. So he did make a couple charges against Mexican forces, conscript forces, and won some glorious battles. But he was on horseback and he lived off the land because he fought a guerrilla warfare type tactic. He didn't have supply. Later on he built up supply trains and he became a much more professional modern army. But as he came out of favor because the revolution was pretty much solidified, he came out of favor because he wasn't going to be given a leadership position anymore. He did not disband his forces, but he had no way to supply them. The New Mexican government wasn't going to supply him, so he decided that he was going to come up north to raid the United States because northern Mexico had already been devastated by the revolution. You can't squeeze blood out of a stone. And when that happened, what did we do?
We sent our troops in.
That's right. We sent them down because we probably didn't think that the Mexican government.
He eventually became the equivalent of a Mexican warlord type. like you would find in Asia or around China. He morphed from whatever he was, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, to a guy that was in it for himself. He was kind of like Quantrell's Raiders and everything, and he was then in it for himself, under the guise of patriotism. And I remember the big attack was in 1916 at Columbus, New Mexico, where he raided, and his purpose of the raid was to get horses, supplies, and weapons for his men, as you said.
Yeah, and he killed 23 U.S. citizens when he did that. And those are civilians, not military.
That is correct.
Because, they're going to hit soft targets. They're not going to hit the hard target military. And the thing is, when we went down into Mexico to find Pancho Villa and to basically end him, right? End him. We ran into more trouble from the Mexican civilians because to them he was a folk hero, right? But also we had battles with the current Mexican government, the current Mexican army that had won the revolution, and they were fighting against us because they're saying we were invading Mexican territory. When in effect we were, right? In effect we were doing that, but we were going after them because they weren't doing anything about this guy. They had given him, amnesty, right? So they gave him a big lot of land and said, here, you could take this and you could take the remainder of your troops and you could go there and you could live out your life in peace. Just don't be Pancho Villa anymore. And yeah, you're right. He couldn't live with that.
Well, the elephant in the room and the undercut of this, though, too, is that Zimmerman letter from Germany to Mexico, where, they wanted the United States to be pinned down and problems all over so as not to get us involved in World War I. And there's allegations of, the Mexican government, didn't stop them for that reason. And then, for, their own, they were afraid of a groundswell down there and that they would lose power. As you said, they were just recently installed in power. So there's a couple of external factors, as there always are in these issues that come up, whether today or in the past.
Yeah, no, it's just not one issue thing. It's not absolutely, like you said. Okay, so we're going down there to get Pancho Villa, right? To stop him from invading our territory, thieving from us and killing our citizens, which should be considered an act of war, right? We should, if we told the new Mexican government, right, hey, that's an act of war. Now we have to get the Congress to declare war. Let's say Congress declares war at the time, and we go in with, they know we're highly industrialized, right? We're a highly industrialized country, and we start mobilizing in 1916 instead of 1917, right? And we build up an army and we just march south. I mean, we did it in the 1840s. What, 1848? We marched on Mexico City.
Right.
Yeah. And we did that with a pre-Civil War army. And in between, it was pretty much a peacetime army. We had nothing other than the War of 1812 to the Civil War. And then the Mexican-American War, where all the Civil War generals came up. They learned something.
Right, and one of the unsung heroes of that war was actually Ulysses Grant.
Yes.
From Illinois, actually. So he was a real big influence. I mean, I read a book one time. There were real aspects of daring done by Grant during that, where he was known as a child as the horse whisperer, because when he was a child in I think it was Ohio or something, a horse was stampeding with a carriage. He jumped and he was crawling in front. The horse stopped and jumped over him, and he was uninjured. And from that end, he actually had to go from one side of a town to another without a saddle. He jumped on the horse and was sideways, like something out of a fantastic Hollywood movie. And I mean, there's definite acts of heroism by Grant in that war.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're bringing up, another thing that we're going to get into is the horses. But to continue on, you got the New Mexican government can't go against one of their own generals that helped them win. All right, this guy helped them win, and it's very touchy for them. But he's not getting supplied, and he's not getting the leadership in Mexico that he would want, nor was he possibly capable for politics. You know, you could have very strong generals, very strong leaders on the battlefield, leaders of men on the battlefield that they'll follow. But when you sit down in a room with the cigar smoking, the fat men, you know, can you get things done? Probably unlikely.
The other thing, don't forget, is the increase in the use of relatively modern media. He was very photogenic, and there was the silent movie reels and the radio. Yep. The radio was coming into popularity in like 1912, 1913, and he was fit for that. He was like a pre-Castro. He was like very dashing.
I think he was better looking than Castro. I don't think Castro was a very good looking guy, you know.
Right, but he got the attention of the early media at that time.
He was like a not Aeroflot. Who is the oh my God. It'll come to me. But the Valentino, he was like a Valentino, Omar Sharif almost, you know.
Correct.
The big mustache. Correct. All right. So now the Mexican government has to come in. Their new force, right? Their new federal force, probably made up of other officers, because it wasn't just Zapata, it wasn't just Pancho Villa. There was a lot of other revolutionaries of smaller size, probably, you know, more politically adept. And he had a professional force, and he met up with the U.S. and they caused casualty. The U.S. didn't win these battles. The Mexicans took U.S. prisoners. All right. And so you got the Mexican government showing strength because, okay, you came into our country kind of without our permission, but then we have to show something. We can't let you, you know, just let your generals here that were fighting a guerrilla war, bring your guerrilla war up to the United States. So, and I make this analogy, right? Like, why were we over in Iraq and Afghanistan? I'm like, or why are we fighting these proxy wars and stuff like that? I'm a big anti-war guy, honestly, but when you look at something, where do you want to fight a war? In the United States or in someone else's country?
You want to fight it by them.
Yeah, you want to fight it by them. You want to blow up their stuff. You want to blow up their bridges. You want to blow up their power plants. You want to blow up, you know, their cities. You don't want to blow up ours, right? So if you keep your house nice and clean, or apartment, you're living in a condo, right? You're living in a big building, condo association, everything. And you keep your condominium clean, nice and clean. You don't have bugs, you don't have rodents, you don't leave food laying around, you're not spilling grease all over the floors, right? You know, you keep your place clean, and you got an infestation of vermin and roaches. And you're like, hey, where are these coming from? Where do they come from? And you try to stop them, right? And you realize that your neighbors are filthy. They don't care. They like it. They don't care. It doesn't bother them. They don't mind it, right? But it bothers you. So you could fight all the time to stop them in your room, but you're going to keep getting them over and over. The only way to stop that is to go to your neighbor's house and crush it at the source. So when you're talking about, like, Zapata would become, not Zapata, but Pancho Villa up the north, he would become, you know, he's like this problem, and your neighbor won't solve the problem because he's living with it, right? This is their guy. He comes up into your country, and he's causing this problem. Well, you could keep trying to wipe him out in your country, but he's blowing up your stuff, right? Take it down to him. Take the source to him. Make it end. What happened in Afghanistan? Did the actual Afghanistan government, the Taliban, attack us? No, they didn't. But what did they provide? They provided a safe haven for all the vermin. Hey, bring them on.
Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hi, is this Harry?
It is indeed.
Hi, Harry. This is Harry from SHARKHUNTERS, Paul.
Hi, Harry.
Hey, Paul.
All right, so have you been listening?
Just for the last couple minutes, I'm writing books still.
Yeah, I wrote a couple novels. One of them's up here, The Sunder Platoon. But they're nothing like yours. Yours is historical. Mine are all fiction.
Right. You got to be smart to write fiction. That's why I don't do it.
So, what do you think of the Zimmerman letter?
Well, you caught me by surprise. Tell me about. I just tuned in a few minutes ago.
So, the topic that we're bringing up, Paul brought it up, is our incursion into Mexico in 1916.
Okay.
The Mexican expedition. And one of the things that Paul brought up that was concerning to us was the Zimmerman letter, where the German, was it German or Germany, right?
Yeah, it was the German ambassador.
German ambassador sent a letter to Mexico, encouraging them to take military action against the United States on our southern border.
Okay, right. Yeah, the United States was not as strong as we are today. The U.S. was kind of weak in those days. Germany was extremely strong.
And we had it mobilized.
Not attack us?
Yeah, we hadn't mobilized yet.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they were afraid that if we did mobilize, right, that we could send troops over to Europe in mass, lots of them, which we did, But
eventually,
if we were tied down on the southern border, half of those troops would be tied down at least,
Right, and the majority of the United States citizens were against us getting involved in World War I. 87% of the people wanted us to stay out of it.
Yeah, well, that's why Wilson got elected, was because he was an isolationist. People didn't want to get involved in European messes.
Exactly. It didn't work out that well, though, did it?
His slogan was, he kept us out of the war when he ran the time before that.
Yeah, right.
Well,
and we have to thank the same two guys for World War I and World War II, Churchill and Roosevelt.
Well, all right, so the reason, in my theory, and this is in your field of expertise, because Harry, SHARKHUNTERS, is very expert on the Atlantic Sea War, all right, the war in the Atlantic. And one of the reasons we went on to
the entire U-boat war of World War II, actually, we are the best, because we've been at this 42 years full-time. It's not something I do part-time. I walked off a job as vice president of a company in Des Plaines to do this full-time, and thank God I got into it early enough. I knew all the great skippers, Otto Kretschmer, Erich Topp, Hardeggen, the list could go on. I knew them all. They were all good friends. As a matter of fact, I had a sleeping room in Otto Kretschmer's house. He and his wife said that I was part of their family.
Oh. So the reason I think we went on the side of the British, all right, not just because we were an English-speaking country, because as you well know, it was close to us being a German-speaking country at the time.
Right, one vote away.
So the British had effectively blockaded the Germans. And you don't go to war with a trade partner, or you try not to go to war with a trade partner. And so we weren't trading with the Germans, and we were trading with the British. And what was funny, it was we got a couple minutes, was the last country, during the Civil War, the British were against us. They were pretty much hoping that the South would win, right?
Yep.
And
they were bringing a lot of weapons running the blockade because the South had no weapons factories, and so they had to come in from somewhere else, and that would be England and I think France.
And down through Mexico.
Yeah. They
would land in Mexico and then bring them across Texas and everything. That's a long way, though, even back in those days. But what I'm saying is, what had Germany done to us other than send a bunch of Hessian mercenaries during the Revolutionary War?
Revolution, yeah.
I don't know if they sent any mercenaries during the War of 1812, because that was kind of the Napoleonics. So,
and you have to remember also that the King of England back when we were declaring our independence, had never been to England. He could hardly speak English. He was German. Right today, the crown of England sits on a German head by blood. That's the House of Saxe, Coburg, and Goethe before they changed the name to the House of Windsor.
Yeah, it's pretty much all the same blood. That's why when you cut them, they keep bleeding. They just don't stop.
Yeah, World War I was three cousins, the King of England, the Tsar of Russia, and
the Kaiser.
And the Kaiser. Yeah, the Kaiser. They were all cousins.
Yeah.
And they all went back to Queen Victoria, who was probably the most powerful monarch ever in history.
I disagree. I believe Catherine was.
Okay, yeah, but Catherine didn't get involved in wars.
She did. She wiped out the Cossacks pretty much. She took over the Sach.
Okay, that's not what I would consider a major war like World War II, World War I, etc.
Yeah, well, the wars on the Eastern Front were pretty brutal. You know?
Oh yeah, they were not nice people. The same thing as when our guys in World War II got taken prisoners by the Japanese. I will never own a Jap car, and
let's be nice. Let's Japanese car, because there's other words. Let's not be pejorative. Pejorative, yes. Big words. Big words. I learned the big word.
Yeah, but the way they tortured our prisoners for their own sick pleasure, I'll never.
Oh, absolutely. You know,
never own one of their cars.
Are we coming up on a break?
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. So
when they complain, to get off the show.
You know, in Okinawa, no. I want you back after the break. But at Okinawa, you know, we have some Marines and maybe some military personnel that they've never been out 2 blocks away from their home, and they send them over to Okinawa, and they're like in this candy store and everything, and they commit some heinous acts. And then the people of Okinawa and the Japanese are screaming that they want the U.S. out of the bases. And all I would do if I was the ambassador to Japan is say, Wake Island, shut up.
Oh, not only Wake Island, but on the island of Chichijima, where George Herbert Walker Bush splashed down. He was about 4 or 5 miles offshore. He incidentally was a member of Shark Hunters until his death. He saw the launch coming out to get him, to take him back as a prisoner, but fortunately the submarine USS Finback came up surface, took him aboard. They found out after the war that the commandant at Chichijima had the captured American flyers cooked and fed to his troops.
Oh my God! You know, I never heard that, but
well,
yeah.
I do this history 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's Saturday. I should be doing something other than working, but I'm locked in my office still writing books. We got 66 books in print already, all about primarily World War II.
What's your webpage?
SharkHunters.com.
Okay, so we're going to a break now and cut into the sponsors here. And when we come back, maybe Harry will stay on the line. And
if you want me, I'll be here.
Sure. Busy, you know, so I still got to go sit down and get those things uploaded. So do we still have Harry on the line?
Yes, sir, you do.
Sure do.
You know, Harry, Paul's father was in the Navy in World War II, but he was in the Pacific Theater, right?
No. Dad was in the Gulf and going to the Atlantic. They were going to go to the Pacific. He was on an LST. He was actually on 2, 429 and 500.
Yeah. That's a nice. Those are nice ships. The LST. When I wanted to go to the somewhat secret island in the central South Atlantic that's owned by Brazil, you have to have permission and help from the Brazil Navy. They took me out there on an LST that had been refurbished and bought from England. And the island was one that nobody ever heard of, and it was used as a radio base by Germany in the first half of World War II. And then after World War II was over, they maintained a supply area there for some years after the war.
And Let's see. Yeah, my Uncle Mitch, he was in the Aleutians. He got drafted right out of Harrison High School.
The Aleutians. Lucky him.
Yeah, he got drafted. He was 18. He hadn't even graduated yet, and they drafted him into the California National Guard. And then he went up to the Aleutians, and he fought the Japanese up there.
Right. During World War II, they had to get as many people mobilized as possible.
Yeah.
And I personally think they never should have let go of the draft. We should still have a draft. You'd have a hell of a lot less crime on the streets.
You see, that's debatable. Now, one of the things as a military intelligence guy and a Chicago police detective, and being in the Army Reserve and the National Guard, there were a lot of these kids that were getting recruited by the gangs to join the Army. Especially the Army Reserve and National Guard, because they wouldn't go away for, 3 or 4 years. They would go to their basic training, AIT, and usually they would take the shortest thing, like a 72 Lima, a clerk typist or something. The shortest training they could get, but they would still get that basic combat training, and they would get an understanding of the military, and they would bring this back to the gangs to militarize the gangs.
It must have happened after my day, because I'm a whole bunch older than that. When I was around, we still had a draft, and kids who, 18, 19 years old, who otherwise would have wound up in the gangs and doing whatever they do, they wind up into the military. And looking at my own situation, I was never in gangs. I was never a criminal or anything like that. But boot camp got my head out of my ass, and my time in the Air Force gave me direction, and quite honestly, it grew me up.
So, like, when I went in, up until, and I get into this show on lawfare and the overreach of judges and the over social good feels, everything's in the feels thing of the current thing. Half of my platoon was there because they stole cars, and the judge told them you had to join the Army, and I'm an all-volunteer Army. They said join the Army or you're going to go to jail. Right?
Okay, yeah.
So they would join the Army.
There too.
They would join the Army. They would get straightened out. But now someone filed suit. I don't know, the ACLU or the Spitlickers. Files suit and says, "Well, you can't do that. That's a violation of their civil rights." No, it isn't. It really isn't.
I know. Everybody is suing everybody now.
Now that was a big recruiting. Not really recruiting. They're like forcible recruiting for the military, and you straighten out these kids. And they're going to the service. And they did a study after the draft was eliminated in 73, I think, right? The draft
something like that.
stopped.
I was already well into the business world by then.
And what they said was that if you reinstated the draft, you would get the exact same people that are volunteering now, because those that didn't want to go would always have an exception to the draft, or they would need a moral waiver, or they would have a doctor write that there was some sort of sickness and everything. So having a volunteer Army, if you reinstate the draft, you end up with the same people that would volunteer anyways.
Okay.
So
I remember when I was in, though, we had some guys that were kind of screwed up in the civilian world, and they became decent young men in the service.
But I've seen decent young men that have joined up, and not decent young men, but I've seen screwed up people join up too, and they stayed screwed up, and they were really screwed up.
They kicked them out of the Air Force pretty quick.
Yeah,
and this was before the days of don't ask, don't tell, and before the days of where you had to mark what kind of pronoun you wanted to be called. I learned real quick down there at 615 West Van Buren, where
I went through there. Did you stay at the Congress Hotel?
No, I lived out in Berkeley, so we just came down and away I went. But we were standing in, all the different tests you go through, and there's one place where we're all standing in line, shoulder to shoulder, and the sergeant goes by, to each guy. Do you like girls? Yes, sir. Do you like girls? Yes, sir. He got to me and said, do you like girls? I said, yes, sir. You're going to issue me a couple of them? And that's when I learned my pronoun. Shut up, asshole. Get back in line.
All right, dude, we try to keep it clean in the the radio here.
Oh, okay. Pardon me. Shut up. Right up and get back
Hey,
in.
Mike,
What?
that's so they didn't kick him out without a parachute. That's the only worry I got.
Yeah. So we were talking, me and Paul were talking, maybe you have an opinion on this, and we were talking about that Mexican incursion and how it has an effect today. Because the big thing is the cartels pretty much run the border. All right?
Oh, they sure do. They pretty much run the whole country down there.
Well, that's the thing. All right, so we got a problem. All right, now I'm not anti-Mexican. You call me that. I don't care. I'm not. Call me whatever you want.
No, I'm not anti-anybody either. It's criminals and people who want to hurt us.
There becomes a time when you're complicit. All right? When you're complicit with what's going on. So, like President Trump has put on the tariffs on China saying, you're producing all the fentanyl. All right, and they go, oh, no, we're not. Oh, like I would believe the Chinese Communist government, like one
Hey, I've been there.
Right?
I'll tell you about them guys. They'll look you right in the face and smile, and they'll lie, and they know that you know they're lying, and they keep right on going.
Yeah, because it's rude. It's rude to tell them they're lying. They could lie, but if you catch them in a lie, you're at fault for, Anyways, right? So how is this fentanyl getting in? Well, the cartels are the middlemen. The cartels do not produce heroin, all right? The cartels...
Right, they just transship it.
I don't know who this guy is. What is... Oh, yeah, no, they're just the middlemen. They transship it and they smuggle it in. That's their, that's how they make their money. They don't produce cocaine, all right? The same thing. Right. They bring it up from Colombia, from Venezuela, from Peru, right? They may produce marijuana, but we produce better marijuana.
Oh, good.
And the volume that they would need to bring up to make any significant profit is, it's like it's not worth it. So the big bucks are cocaine, because you can ship pure cocaine and then cut it. Heroin, you could ship pure heroin and then cut it. Fentanyl, oh my God, you cut the snot out of that, but you better know what you're doing, right? And now, that's one of his things. He's not going to lower the tariffs till the Chinese stop producing this fentanyl, right?
Yeah.
And shipping it over here and causing us problems, right? So how is the Mexican government protecting us? They just let the stuff go through, because what the money goes up, the money comes to the cartels, and they have the cash money in Mexico. At this point in time, I would say that the Mexican government is completely complicit.
Well, not only that, Mike, but I suspect that's all it is. I suspect they're getting their cut.
Oh, they're absolutely getting their cut.
Of the bucks, yeah, for letting it go through.
All right. So we have to stop it. And like I was saying, how do you stop it? Do you stomp it in your own house? Once these guys get in, they're all over the country, and all of a sudden they got due process. All right.
Yeah.
They've got. We have to have probable cause. We have to have reasonable suspicion. They get a trial. They get all this stuff. If we stop them,
lawyers too. We provide their lawyers.
If we stop them in Mexico, right? Then we just ship them off to Gitmo, or we ship them off to somewhere else. And
I had what I thought was a good idea. Instead of putting up a wall or bringing border guards and all that, forget it. Take down the wall and put Ma Deuce every 100 yards along the border. You're military. You know who Ma Deuce is.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's another realism out here. Is the Vietnam War? They did another study. And, they train these guys hard in basic training, marksmanship and everything, and they make you angry and they put you under stress, and they want to make you a total killer. Well, initially, when these guys went over there and they got into contact with the enemy, when they first got into contact with the enemy, 90% of them intentionally shot over the enemy's head.
Really?
Yes, because it's very difficult. It's very rare. If it wasn't rare in this world, all right, we would be wiped out already. All right. The thing is, for a normal human being, it is absolutely repugnant to take another human life. It's just flat out repugnant. It's very difficult to get through that. You have to be in a fight or flight, absolute preservation of yourself, right? To get into that. It's hard to fight through. And when you finally get a professional soldier, all right, a professional person that can do that, it pushes emotional trauma on them. There are psychopaths out there, sociopaths and psychopaths that can kill with impunity. You don't want them in your army.
But that's why you have so much propaganda. Germans were all horrible monsters, and that's why we have to kill them. That's what we were taught. In World War I, they were taught, I'm not that old. I'm old, but I ain't that old. But we were taught that the U-boaters would rape young women to death and fire their lifeless bodies out the torpedo tubes. Oh, horrible. We had to kill all those nasty Huns. Nobody ever thought to ask, how did you find young women out in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah.
World War II.
They were mermaids.
They were mermaids.
I forgot that part. World War II. How many people believe that they machine gunned people in the water? It never happened. I was a kid during the war years. I saw the propaganda. We had to hate the Germans because they, among other things, machine gunned helpless men in the water. It's proven absolutely it never happened, but it was great propaganda.
You know what we have now? We have news media that does stuff like that. What did they scream? What is the first thing they scream? All right, they're going to take your Social Security away.
Oh, yeah, and Medicare. Don't forget that.
I'm like, well, that hasn't happened. And the only time it's been cut or taxed is under the other party. But I'm not political. I'm not a political show, so I don't want to lean that way. What I'm telling you is our show is to fight fear like that. So the greatest tool that a totalitarian type government, that a despotic government has is fear. All right. And if you have a country that's living in a constant state of fear, you're only in fear for your own existence, your own freedoms, and everything else. You don't worry about your fellow man.
Of course, yeah.
All right. So we try to fight that here.
To the choir here, Mike. I was a commissar of the Soviet Union when the
jestem Angelem Smrti, času čistovania prišel.
Ja vas po-ruski, nie tovarищ.
Ja učil ruský jazyk vo vreme holodnej vojny vo vojennej škole.
When the CIA politely asked me to go over there off and on, back and forth between 1991 and 96, because they needed pictures of certain admirals. So anyhow, when I was there, they made me a commissar of the Soviet Union. I met Vladimir Putin. He's not a madman, but you got to have propaganda. He's a hardcore Russian patriot. And when I was there the first time, it was 91. It was the Communist Soviet Socialist Republic. We went into
the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic.
Sorry?
Soyuz Sovietsky Socialistic Republic.
Let's stick to English for your listeners here, unless you're broadcasting over to Moscow.
I hope we go. Okay, so we're online. All right, we stream online. Now, I don't know, because what you have is...
I'd like a call from Vladimir, actually. I'd like to talk to him. I wish if he's a listener, please call in, Vladimir.
Or if the FBI is listening in, please get in with your former KGB counterparts and have a direct line to Vlad, and he can call in on our show.
Well, let me back you up a little bit here. After 33 years, just about 2-3 months ago, 33 years of silence, all of a sudden I hear from my friend Anatoly, who was my translator, who I find was very high-level GRU, which is the military version of KGB. Yeah. And he's working on getting me an invitation to be in Red Square on the 2nd of September, which, of course, is my birthday, but it was also VJ Day, and they are going to have a massive celebration for the 80th anniversary of the end of the Great Patriotic War. There was no such thing.
That was yesterday.
World War II.
That was yesterday.
He's talking about the Eastern. He's talking about the Eastern.
He's talking about Japan.
All right, so the Russians were not technically at war with Japan, until after we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then,
Right, and then
they
moved
declared
in.
war on Japan.
Yeah, and then they moved in and took land. Yeah.
That's like,
And they were doing that so they could glom onto everything. I sat in.
Yeah, that's right. An
1990,
opportunistic front. Yes.
yeah, 1991. I sat in on a big meeting. They call it a round table. It was actually rectangular, and about 80 people in this room, and they were they were discussing whether Russia should give the Sakhalin Islands back
Nope.
to Japan.
nope.
Well, I was the visiting Yankee. Nobody else had ever seen an American before, and so all the press and everything, they were all hanging over me.
Hold on.
What the hell was
They
going
did see
on.
the Americans because one of Doolittle's raids, all right, raiders, landed in Russian-occupied territory over there, and the Russians interred them for the entire war.
Well, it kept them from getting killed.
Well, it kept them from fighting too, but they interred them because technically they were a neutral party in the in the Pacific Front, and they were following Geneva Convention.
That's also how they stole and re-engineered the B-29, which was their first heavy bomber.
Yes.
I saw one of those in China. They retro-engineered a B-29, except they put Russian engines on it. An ugly-looking thing. They reverse-engineered it even to the damn bullet holes in the side of the airplane.
Well, okay, so when when Stalin had his VE day, I think it was 47, right?
Yeah.
And I think Truman went over for that. I'm not sure. But he was having the thing, and during the parade, there was a flyover of 5 Russian reverse-engineered B-29s.
Yeah.
And Truman looks up and is like, all right. So, they knew, we didn't think that the Russians had the bomb, but the Russians absolutely had the bomb at that time.
Yeah, they did. And we had 4 nuclear weapons, not 2. We were told we had 2, one at Hiroshima, one at Nagasaki. However, there was one also dropped on Osaka that did not go off. It was a dud, and the Japanese got that, and we're trying to use it as a trade. Don't invade us, and we'll give you this here bomb. So Russia just invaded them and took the bomb. And the 4th one never got out of the country. My career field in the Air Force was nuclear and thermonuclear weapons.
Yeah, my career field in the Army was try not to get nuked. Here, I've got an old Cold War joke that's kind of getting more and more current, unfortunately.
Yeah.
How do you make chicken Kiev?
Tell me.
First, you preheat the city to 450 degrees.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's not Kiev anymore. It's Kiev. The liberal loonies are changing everything.
Well,
have you noticed we no longer have jet fighters?
We're not political here. We're not political here. So liberal, conservative, we just talk in general terms. There are some loony people out there. I agree with that. All right, but there are some very good people on both sides. I have good friends that see things polar opposite of me, but they're still my good friends.
Yeah, as long as you keep the politics out of it, you can keep friends.
Remember, the left and the right are just 2 different wings of the same bird.
Yeah. Well, I had a very wise police detective tell me once. He says they got to split down the middle, and they're stealing from both ends.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, a few more minutes to the next break. And I'm trying to get back around to this and everything. Yeah.
I wanted to bring up something going back to Pancho Villa and stuff like that. How I got interested in this was when I was in the state's attorney's office, and I brought a book around with me for when I was off time sitting in court, and it was called The Great Pursuit, and it's an excellent book. It details the whole campaign. And there's some things I learned, like, now there's, they're revising history and they're making it sound like it wasn't successful. But it was the first integrated use of airplanes and machine guns and communications. And we actually...
And motor vehicles, too. Motor vehicles.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. Our trucks were Stanley steamers. And in the first day, we built a road into Mexico 100 miles in one day. Okay, wow. You can't do that kind of stuff like right now. And those planes we had were Curtiss Jennies, and they were flying at night and landing at night in 1916, okay? And in that book, there's a footnote, and I've confirmed it even before we were talking right now, that in 1913, some miners were kidnapped. And the American government, through Wells Fargo Bank, around 1913, 1914, paid Pancho Villa $50,000 to get the
a lot of money back then.
Right, and there's an allegation, and it's unconfirmed, but it could be realistic, that the United States thought that they were going to get into World War I, and we hadn't had any modern combat experience since the Spanish-American War, and things were different now, that we kind of encouraged the Villa to do things so that we could get some combat experience through that. And it's kind of interesting because it's only in the last 15, 20 years that they've acknowledged that we did pay Villa a ransom.
Now, we were paying, the U.S. government was paying ransoms to the Barbary Coast pirates, to the Shah, I don't know if they call them the Shah or whatever, of Algeria.
The Muftis.
Muftis, yeah.
So this goes back in history to paying ransoms and paying tribute.
But you're not supposed to. Thomas Jefferson said millions for defense and not 1 cent for tribute.
Yeah, because he got tired of it, because that's when he sent the Marines over there.
Yeah.
And,
and the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli.
And the first Barbary Coast battle there, right? Congress had not declared war. All right, so when we come back, we're talking with Harry Cooper from SHARKHUNTERS. All right, so we'll this is great. I ran your name, Harry, and almost the first thing that comes up was the Spitlickers. They don't like you.
I know it. Those lying bums.
All right, we'll be back soon. Want to read some action-packed, exciting pulp fiction? Read the works of Michael Tooman, now featuring the international crime thriller, I Married a Bot Madam. Available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle editions. The paperback is all...
First War of the Falkland Islands, Islas Malvinas. 1915, the cruiser squadron of Admiral Graf van Spee tangled with the British cruiser squadron, and both sides blew the tar out of one another.
Yeah, I just saw that. on a YouTube video. I was like, it just came up randomly, but I'm always interested in that stuff, especially between,
So the only ship left on the German side was the cruiser Dresden, the light cruiser Dresden, and it took off running. I mean, what else can you do? The thing was so heavy, it was darn near ready to top over, because those things burned coal back in them days, and they had all the coal bunkers filled. They had coal stacked on deck and everything. So they turned around and fled. They were 1 knot faster than the fastest British ship, so they got away. They went through the Straits of Magellan, and young Oberleutnant Wilhelm Canaris, who later became Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, in charge of all the spook works. Anyhow, they were finding all the U-Plätze, unbekannt Plätze, unknown places, coves, harbors, little places with no repair work, nothing, just harbors where you could duck in and hide. And in typical German precision, he plotted them out, and so there were hidden places all along there come World War II. They even made a John Wayne movie about it.
Oh, that was great. Not Reap the Wild Wind. It was
I forgot it also, but
no, I got it. I actually paid for that one. So I have it
Something with blood.
What?
Something with blood. Something with blood.
No,
no, you're talking about Blood Alley. That was Chinese.
He's a merchant marine. He's a German merchant marine, all right, and he's got a load of nickel ore or something, right? And he wants
whatever was on there. A lot of people that became famous later on. What's his name? Who played Matt Dillon? He was in there, etc. So anyhow, to the point, the Dresden got as far as Chile before it finally just quit.
Sea Chase.
Sea Chase. That's it.
Sea Chase.
So anyhow, Canaris and the Dresden got as far as Chile. They were all interned, and the ship was taken out and scuttled by some of the offshore islands, where it still is. But they were all locked up, etc. Somehow Canaris got out, escaped, or probably bribed his way out, and he went over the Andes in the dead of winter. This is one tough guy. And he came down the other side and found a place called San Carlos de Bariloche, which he described as an impregnable Shangri-La for the Fuhrer. This was in 1915.
So he was in a valley between the mountains.
Well, it's on the eastern side of the Andes. I've been there 11 times. You get off the airplane there, you think you landed in Bavaria by mistake. Everything is Bavarian architecture. You look across this massive lake, Lake Nahuahuapi, and there's the Andes behind it. You'd swear you were in Bavaria or Austria. So anyhow, later on, what a lot of people don't realize, the Germans were coming and going through Argentina all through the war, not with the big ships, but they had 90-ton wooden sailing ships, yawl rigged, if you understand sailing, and they were coming in and out of a place called Caleta de los Loros, Parrot Cove, in Golfo San Matias, St. Matthew's Gulf. They were coming and going, bringing supplies, bringing agents, bringing primarily radio supplies, and also money, valuables, etc. They could trade off for food. And so in 1944, what the heck was his name? High-ranking Nazi guy, his name begins with an A. Oh, well, anyhow. He asked Heinrich Garbers, who was the skipper of one of these secret boats. They had 12 of them. Would it be possible for him to come ashore and smuggle somebody ashore without being spotted? And Garbers told him, of course, I've done it several times. And, of course, he was told, that'll be all, Lieutenant. So they were bringing stuff in and out, not Hitler. You know, some of these people wrote books. They look
The Boys from
like
Brazil. Where they cloned Hitler.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Yeah, I saw that movie too. Boys from Brazil, great movie. Gregory Peck was not the right guy to be cast for Mengele, though. But anyhow, moving along, the leaders of a lot of the high leaders of the Third Reich came ashore at Golfo Nuevo. We've covered that in great depth, but not Hitler. Some people have written other books that look an awful lot like my book. I'm not using the word plagiarize, however, but these guys claimed that Hitler went to South America on board U-530. Ridiculous. Hitler was celebrating his birthday on the 20th of April, 1945, in Berlin, and U-530 was already 3 days out to sea.
However, let's now really getting into the tinfoil hat things here. There was a movie, and art imitates life, or life imitates art sometimes. So in my theory, Hollywood tells the ghetto how to behave. They just eat it up, and they do everything Hollywood tells them to do.
Okay.
But all right, so we watched the movie The Eagle Has Landed. I watched the movie The Eagle Has Landed. And one of the things they had there is, they sent the German spec ops guys, Suicide Squad, basically, because they're all waiting to be killed, And they go in and they're going to assassinate Churchill. And they end up assassinating Churchill's doppelganger, all right? His impersonator, all right? Now, we know there's a lot of guys out there impersonating our current president. They do a pretty good job of it. I mean, they make money doing it.
Everybody had doubles, all the high-ranking people.
So who's to say that it wasn't Adolf Hitler's double that was celebrating his birthday on April 20th? If you know the war is lost, if you're first of all, right, if you're not really insane, you know the war is lost. You're pulling at straws to hope that the people win. There's no way you're going to win, right? You know this is happening. Well, you leave your duplicate in place and leave him in charge, and then you ditch out of there while you still can. Because I'm not praising Hitler.
I'm not laughing at you, but
or degrading
I do this 12 hours a day, and I know who went where and the pictures, etc.
But that's the possibility I pull out of my head. All right.
Okay.
If I was writing a novel, that's the way I would do it.
Well, a novel, yeah. Like I say, you got to be smart to write novels. That's why I don't do it. But Hitler, the real Hitler, was seen in the bunker on his birthday when U-530 was already 3 days out to sea. Not only that, U-530 was on its way to New York City, New York Harbor, on a combat patrol because the war was still going on officially. And I knew the skipper of U-530. He was a member of SHARKHUNTERS and a friend of mine. We exchanged letters back and forth. We were in constant contact. He swore on his honor as an officer and a gentleman he had no passengers on board. And I believe him. If you're going to try to get the leader out of the country, you're not going to send him on a combat patrol. Plus, Hitler was incredibly claustrophobic and violently seasick, so to think this guy was going to spend 2 months in a stinky steel tube bouncing around, we know how he got to South America, and it was not on a submarine.
So you're saying Hitler did get to South America?
Absolutely. You got to read my book, Hitler in Argentina. The proof is there. There are dozens of FBI reports in there. The FBI knew where he was.
The FBI has no credibility.
Everybody, all the top guys knew where he was.
Okay.
Plus, now you see, the official reports say Hitler shot himself in the right temple. And then there's a picture of a dead Hitler with a bullet hole right in the center of his forehead. Well, that ain't the right temple. Secondly, who can hold a pistol in their hand and point it around to their forehead? You can't.
Well, you can.
Well, you can, but it's easier to do it.
I've investigated quite a few suicides as a Chicago police detective.
Okay, and I had a Tampa police detective here, 32 years on the force, homicide detective. I had him look at the picture because I didn't see any powder burns. So I said, how far away do you got to be so you don't get powder burns? He said, this is an exit wound. This guy was shot in the back of the head.
Wait, if you Google the proper way to do yourself in, I'm not telling anyone to do themselves in. That's not right. Really, it's shooting yourself in the back of the head. And you could just go like this, all right? You can do it. And if you have a snub nose or a shorter barrel thing. So I'm not, the technicalities is, yes, it can be done. And,
I'm used to my 44 Magnum. It's a little tough turning that thing around.
Well, that's a big gun, unless you have the Bulldog version of it, all right? Yeah. You could get a 2-inch barrel 44 Magnum, all right?
That ought to be all sorts of fun to drop the hammer on that sucker.
Well, there's...
At any rate, we've got pictures of Hitler taken in 1947, 2 years after the suicide. He looks awful good for a dead guy.
So how do you say he got out of that bunker then? And when if you say he was in the bunker and now the Red Army has basically surrounded Berlin.
Almost.
Okay. Yeah, they're probably rat lines where you could possibly get out because
exactly.
You know that
one of our members who was a
Himmler had gotten out and got captured in like an enlisted man's jacket.
That's correct. a lot of people got out, but he went up to Norway. There was a Blumenvoss BV-138 flying boat landed there on the Wannsee. Now, we don't know who got on board it, but we do know Hitler wound up at Bardufoss Airport, which was still German-controlled. Norway was German-controlled for 3 months after the war. They were just sitting there waiting to be overrun or to be picked up. But while we in the U.S. could build huge airplanes like the B-17, the B-29, one every hour rolling out of the plant in Wichita.
You know,
Germany.
You look at those. I was in D.C. and there's a part of an off-site part of the Smithsonian. All right, so it's off-site from the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it's
like
the Air and Sea Museum. The Air Museum.
You know, that B-29 is not as big as it looks in the films. It's not that big. It's not like
still, it's still pretty damn big.
It is big, but it's not as big as it looks in the films.
Germany.
But the flying boats were able to go unrefueled for long distances,
or they could refuel at sea from a ship
or a submarine.
Or a submarine.
Yeah, the BV-138s did. We've got pictures of some of our members who were U-boat commanders refueling a BV-138 on a calm sea. Anyhow, Germany built 3 airplanes called the Ju-390. They were numbered V1, V2, and V3, which had nothing to do with the rockets, but that's just how they named them. V3 never got finished. It was broken up at the end of the war, either by the Allies or the Germans, I don't know who. V2 was 3 meters longer than V1, so it had more fuel capacity. It had an 8,000-mile range. It was a 6-engine, about the size of a 757. This is how he went down there. We have a chart, hand-drawn chart, that we got out of an archive. It showed where he landed outside of a little village called Paysandú, Uruguay. I was there. It's a 15-kilometer long road going southwest to northeast alongside a monstrous, huge ranch, and he landed on that on the property there. This Ju-390 had a very low landing speed, 75 knots.
Wow, that's impressive.
And monster huge undercarriage. So they put up an RDF, because there was a little wooded area at the southwest corner. They put up an RDF so this guy could come in.
It's a radio direction finder.
Yeah, sorry. And it landed in the middle of the night. And I was there, and we went to the other the closest neighboring village, which was called Village of 19th of April, something like that, because it was a German village that was put there in 1920-something, German farmers. Most of the men were dead from, overworked. I wouldn't want to be a farmer, hard work. But anyhow, the widows were there. So many of them heard the plane land. Nobody saw it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. They heard the plane land, and we tracked down the lady whose father owned the estancia where it landed. Nice lady. I told her who we were. I don't do Mike Wallace-type ambush interviews. So nice people invited us in, me and my guide, Martin, and gave us cakes and coffee, and we're talking, and nice questions, and they're answering. And then I said, what about the big plane that landed at 2 o'clock in the morning? Both she and her husband with the little nervous tee-hee. Then the lady said, well, that happened 3 years before I was born, but it really didn't happen. Okay. So we talked for a while, and she said, well, the prefect of police came to investigate. Now, the prefect of police is the highest level cop you can have in the province. Yep.
It's like a sheriff.
Yeah. And he came, but it was only a crop duster that landed. And I'm thinking, who's going to buy this story? Crop dusters don't fly at 2 o'clock in the morning because they don't have anything but an airspeed indicator, or maybe an altimeter, but they don't have radar.
Okay. Now, I got to go back on this, all right? The Russian women were flying at night in biplanes.
I know.
And bombing accurately. Bombing accurately.
Witches.
Yes.
Yeah, but they were over Berlin, which was well lit, even though they tried to light it.
They were flying consistently as the Russians moved forward from Belarus all the way on. They
and
kept
they knew
moving
where
forward.
everything was.
Yeah.
However, moving back here, there's no way you can confuse the snarly little 40 horsepower engine in a crop duster with 6 big thundering 1,200 or 1,400 horsepower engines.
Okay, I just got to ask this question before we run out of time. What did they do with the plane?
Oh boy, there's a good question. The story is that the farm workers disassembled it before dawn and carted all the pieces away. Who believes that a bunch of unskilled, untrained farm workers are going to disassemble a plane the size of a 757 in 3 or 4 hours?
Okay,
Last we heard,
farm workers aren't skilled, all right? These guys got to keep their own tractors running. They're usually pretty good diesel mechanics.
You can spitball all you want here, but you're burning up your daylight. I'm going to tell you.
All right.
One of our members, we have SIG agents, intelligence agents.
Okay.
This one is, we call Peter Parker. He's currently working for a spook
The Daily
agency.
Planet.
Yeah, the Daily Planet.
Yeah.
And he said that plane had been flying until 1966 out of Paraguay, and it's on an estate in the northern part of Paraguay. I said, good. Tell me how to find it. I don't mind going over a fence where it says Eingang verboten or no passar. And then I talk to whatever cop comes up. I talk to him in my beautiful down yonder hillbilly, and I get away. He says, no, this is on a private place where they have private guards with orders to shoot to kill.
Okay.
So I said, okay, I can't do that, but tell me how to find it, and I'll go there anyhow. So I'm still waiting to hear back from him.
All right, so the plane flew away into Paraguay, and then some guy bought it, and he's keeping it on his estate.
Well, we think it's one of their former Air Force generals.
So in one of the stories from the language school, Cold War story, the Russians were having they were in the Czech Republic, and they were doing exercises there, and they ran out of their Samo gun, their homemade booze. So they went into town, and they sold their tank for more booze to the Czechs, and the Czech workers came out and disassembled the tank to sell it for scrap.
What has that got to do with what we're talking about?
Well, I think that the farm workers could have cut it apart and sold it for scrap.
Yeah.
And then somebody put it together, and it was still flying until 1966. We know that for a fact.
Well, you know what? Here's another thing. Rather than flying it out, you take it out in pieces and you horse-drawn cart it up there. And I don't doubt you. I'm not arguing with you on the doubt. I'm just saying that there are multiple ways to get rid of that plane.
Right, yeah, they could have had it flown out on a flying saucer, too, but they didn't do that either. They flew it out under its own wings.
Okay. And we believe...
Like I said, no, don't get me wrong. I do this 12 hours a day, and I realize, a lot of people, nobody knows as much about it as I do, probably not because I'm all that great shakes, but because I do it 12 hours a day. I've been in my office since 4 this morning, and I'll be here until 8 o'clock tonight, and same everywhere. And I was there. I was there when that plane landed. I talked to people who heard it, and...
Oh, dude, you have no doubt, sir. I'm not doubting you at all, right?
So what you're telling me is there's no UFOs involved.
No UFOs.
Oh, that's a killer, Mike. Now I'm upset.
Yeah, well,
the UFOs came in and took all the Nazi gold.
Okay. Nazi gold.
And it's on the far side of the moon.
That's right. They're on the far side of the moon.
I'm sorry. That was an entertaining movie. All right, that movie was very. Now, when you watch sci-fi movies and stuff like that, you have to
Right.
suspend disbelief. All right.
But you have to be able to separate sci-fi from fact.
From fact, but some people can't do that. In fact, I would say a third of the population cannot do that. They see
Yeah,
this
that's
stuff
why they-
on TV that's sci-fi. Like this one girl was saying, why can't we be more like Wakanda? All right, a fictional Hollywood country. All right, in Africa that doesn't exist. Right, but because they've seen it on 2 or 3 different movies, they believe that this is an actual place where they filmed on location. Yeah, about 30% of the population cannot separate fiction from reality. Or
That's why they call them sheeple.
all right.
Because they follow where they're told.
So thanks for being on, Harry. I'm glad our mutual friend Larry recommended
Larry's
you.
a great guy.
Yeah.
Larry's a great guy.
Me and Larry go way back in the Army,
Yeah.
way back.
So why don't you ask your listeners to go to SHARKHUNTERS.com and just look around, see what they like. And if any of your listeners want a free copy of the magazine, send me an email, sharkhunters@sharkhunters.com. Say they heard your show, then what the magazine. I'll send them electronically. I'll send them the current issue.
Okay, thanks, Harry. And
My pleasure.
Thanks so much.
So next week we'll be back for, I think it's another 2 hours. I think they start at 6 o'clock next week. So we'll be back for 2 hours next week. Well, maybe something will come up current. Maybe we could go back and rehash this about the border incursions and going and protecting our country by having to go outside of our own borders to protect the inside of our borders of our country. And
Have a good week.
Have a good
Happy
week, everyone.
Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.